relationships. So I was like, look, the federal government, puts these people through the court system. They'll be like 4 years old, and they have to testify in front of an immigration judge. It's like, indigenous people aren't going to do that. They're, they're much smarter, right? They're just better at, dealing with other cultures and relationships, and they'll actually be quite a bit more friendly towards the dreamers. That's what I would go for. I'd go for like the alternative will solve, but first we need to be committed to decolonization. Let me get to my slide though. We'll talk, and then you all can ask more questions. But we want to have some. I'll give you some of my thoughts here about legal immigration. So we talked about this, right? Expansion of settlers, citizenship rights too. There's a pretty strong citizenship K. What is one way that you can maybe ensure or at least help guarantee that the affirmative deals with citizenship or legal permanent residence? What's one way? Rankin. T. Topicality, one way. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So you could be really good at going for a topicality. You have to be citizenship, pathway to citizenship, or pathway to legal permanent residence. If you got good at two things on the negative, the settler colonialism, right, critique, and then topicality, you have to be LPR or citizenship, you could probably debate pretty much any affirmative. Any app that was like, nope, we're not a citizenship right, like, okay, cool, we're gonna go for T. Any app that says we accord citizenship, it's like, excellent, we're gonna go for settler colonialism. Yeah. There are worse ways to do it, people. Definitely. Better ways too, but worse ways certainly. So citizenship and visas too, right? The visa process is also another process where people, come into the United States, they're accorded specific legal status. That legal status sometimes is, even greater than the status that's accorded to native groups. They have, general access, legal protection, all of those types of things. Land plus territory, we talked about that too, the acquisition of land, right, to put immigrants upon, and new settlers. Yeah.
So even like H-1B visa temporary residence is used for settlement?
I mean, I guess in a legal sense, there's a difference between resident visas and non-residents. That's probably more relevant for like a topicality discussion. But certainly in the context of the criticism, they're not going to care that your H-1B folks have to leave at the end of 3 years. If anything, there's going to be a nice link argument they're going to make about how the app just demonstrates there's some like disposable population. You can kind of mix your critiques a little bit and just be like, that's how settler states appropriate and exploit foreign labor. So there's an example that Patrick Wolf discusses too about how Israel, in order to displace and eliminate the Palestinians, they actually brought in undocumented immigrants to do the jobs that otherwise the Palestinians would be doing. So these are pretty basic, but it's like agricultural work, janitorial work, a lot of manual labor. But the Israelis, it's weird because there's no border for them to cross. But Israel was basically like shipping in undocumented immigrants from around the world, essentially, where they would like kind of let them in and be like, all right, it's like you're going to be a construction worker. It's like, well, that's even though the Palestinians wanted those jobs, but it was part of the logic of elimination. So, even an undocumented worker could displace or eliminate some other native or indigenous folks. Yeah.
So, because the Native Americans, like there's not evidence that says they came over from very different
Sure.
10,000 years ago, wouldn't they technically be settling the continent and just taking animals, stars out there before the humans?
Yeah. So you're going to go for the anthropocentrism response? Yeah, I like it. That's fine. So, yeah. You could, against the settler colonialism app, I think you could go for the anthro-K. That would be fine. I guess against the critique, though, that may or may not be a viable app response. I think you're better off going with, there is some really good kind of progress stuff. Most native scholars, too, I will say, do not demand a land repatriation. Right? Like a fair number, a small number of like the radical folks do, and they're like, that's our, unconditional ethic. But most of them are, I would say, pretty reasonable. They're kind of like, no, we really just want rights and, like access to clean water, and like decent schools, and medical care, and the right to practice our religion as we see fit, and the right to speak our languages. You know what I mean? Like, you're kind of like, yeah, that sounds pretty reasonable, right? What's that? Well, I don't really have all that, but but the point is that the permutation could be like we can do those things, but then we don't have to just repatriate the land. That's what I mean. It's like kind of intrinsic as permutation. Yeah.
Like, how would you defend this critique if you were a settler yourself? Like, how could you?
Oh, that's pretty easy, right? Yeah, yeah, you're just like, as settlers, I mean, there are good cards about that. Just as settlers, right, you have a responsibility and ethic to present and promote decolonial scholarship. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of good cards about that. Yeah, you didn't have to get all wacky with that, but settlers like work on. Yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, there are people write specifically about that, the role of settlers in, right, promoting a decolonial ethic and decolonization. Yeah, so. Yeah, that's another good question you can ask too. I think that if the affirmative is a like settler colonial app that doesn't defend like a plan though, then I think you're in a little bit dicier situation. But on the neg, for sure, if they're reading Open Borders Act, you can definitely be like, you know, you're settlers, we're settlers, like this is messed up. Let's talk about decolonization. Yeah. So, all right, any other questions about settler colonialism? We're talking about neoliberalism? Yes.
So what gives natives like the right to their land? Like, because they did settle it first, but like.
I guess it's not just a question of like right, like in a political sense, but also in an ethical sense. So thinking about this like the government as an institution that's been founded upon and then has its primary responsibility is genocide, and then the action of the affirmative is maybe a small part, but it's still a part of that ongoing genocide. It's just an ethical rejection of that, right? So there's maybe a difference between the like, you know, should they have the right to determine their own futures, et cetera, and should they be, you know, eliminated as a population? I mean, that's just like an ethical orientation. Yeah, so I guess, yeah, I don't know. I would be careful on the affirmative from making that style of argument. That's most judges are probably feeling comfortable voting for. So, yeah, but, you know, do it at your own peril. All right, moving on to neoliberalism then. I think we've got about 15, 20 minutes, maybe a little bit more. We started a little late, so. All right. I might move through some of this a little bit quickly, or a little more quickly than I would have before, but I want to give you some background on kind of the formation of neoliberalism as a political ideology and a political idea. So I'm going to start with classical liberalism, and then we're going to talk a little bit about economics, and then neoliberalism emergence kind of in the 40s, 50s, and then really in the 70s and 80s. So classical liberalism is kind of a combination of various theories from John Locke, right? A theory of organization, the two treaties in 1690 about how individuals kind of freely associate together. And individuals also create ownership through labor. So, right, you acquire land, you work the land becomes yours, whereas it used to belong to no one, right? You know, John Locke, also a settler colonialist, so that's all right. Yeah, he gets slaved by settler colonialism. You read the Locke Act, you get destroyed. And then Adam Smith, right, Wealth of Nations, 1776, and a cool year to publish a book. And he says that the pursuit of rational self-interest maximizes wealth. So you're probably familiar with this, right? Some of you probably read Wealth of Nations, or at least like secondary sources relating to it. And then also describes the invisible hand of the market, which is it's not exactly what most people think. It's where, because there are certain connections that we have to each other, the invisible hand of the market will tend to maximize social benefit while also maximizing profit. So the example that Adam Smith uses in Wealth of Nations is how a British individual, they could go elsewhere to look for like exports and things like that, but ultimately they don't want to disadvantage their home country because they have some feelings of, you know, camaraderie or brothership or whatever, you know, they call it the brotherhood, that will then promote the development of that area. So the invisible hand is supposed to secure ethics under capitalism, according to Adam Smith. Thomas Malthus, anyone with a little bit of Malthus? Yeah, the green sustainability just had. Thoroughly Malthusian, which is a problem, probably. That's good. Malthus argues that population growth will outstrip food production, which ultimately means that we'll overshoot population limits and there'll be like a big die-off. More interesting thing about Malthus, though, probably, and the way that he gets incorporated into these types of ideologies, though, is that the poor are essentially responsible for their own plight. So if you're poor, it's because it's your fault. Sorry. Thank you, Malthus, who I'm sure didn't really know a lot of poor people and was never poor himself. I mean, that's a little bit of a background. I want to set that up. And then Marxism is an important other element, right? Karl Marx. How many of y'all heard of Karl Marx? Yeah, good. Excellent. The word out, right? Go Bernie. So Marx has a few different theories that are important to understand for the neoliberalism critique. The first is the labor theory of value. Who knows what the labor theory of value is? Labor theory of value, yeah.
A labor theory of value is that most products get their value because of the labor that's used in them. Like a factory, for example, doesn't really have much value unless you're people working in the factory and are also producing stuff.
Yeah, and the stuff itself, right, the cost of that good, so, you know, I'm sure he has a Microsoft tablet here, right? Yeah, and like, that's, the cost of that is just associated with the labor that's put into it. So, you know, there's probably some fixed amount of labor. This is the labor theory of value. We're going to talk about other theories of value too. They're important. But the labor theory of value says the price is then fixed to the labor that's put into it. There's also a market value. So the accumulation of surplus value is the difference between the labor, right, value and the market value. What's the market value of a good? Yeah.
It's like how much people generally consider it's worth.
Yeah, exactly. So something could be very cheap to produce, but very desirable. And if there weren't very many of them, and it only took 5 minutes to produce, but, you know, let's say coffee, right? If you could only make, you know, 100 cups of coffee every year, that was the total global output of coffee, but it only took 3 minutes to make, because it's just coffee, right? How expensive would a cup of coffee be? I don't know, but I'm sure it would be hideously expensive, because people love coffee. And so presumably there would be some billionaires out there who are like, well, I can't do without my coffee, so I'll give you $500,000 for a cup. And then some of the billionaires would be like, oh, $500,000, I can do more than that, right? That's the market value of a good. And so the difference between the labor value and the market value, the labor value is what you have to pay your worker to produce that good. And then the market value is what you sell it for. Well, what is the difference, right? Who gets the extra money? Who gets the extra money? Capitalists, yeah.
So then if it's like a factory, you know,
Yeah, the owner, right? The owner of the means of production. So, you know, if you work at a Starbucks, they're going to pay you minimum wage or whatever they pay. But then ultimately the owner of Starbucks is going to make up, you're selling a lot more coffee than $7 an hour. One Frappuccino covers your whole hourly wage, right? How many of you like those Frappuccinos? Yeah, they're pretty expensive. And so the surplus value goes to the owner of the means of production. And there are a couple of contradictions of capitalism, according to Marx, that could create the demise of the system and cause revolution, etc. That's one possibility. There are other possibilities as well. One of them is that you have anarchy for capital, but socialism for workers. So capital prefers there to be essentially no governmental involvement, right? If you're running a business and you're investing capital under a capitalist framework, you don't want the government to be involved at all. You just want to be able to, it's like, well, I'm going to, it's like buy your coffee, you're going to sell your coffee in my store, the government's not going to regulate it, there will be no environmental regulations, there will be no safety regulations, that's perfect, wonderful, everyone's happy, except for people who die from our polluted coffee. But other than that, everyone's happy. Right? And so the workers, though, would prefer socialism, at least according to Marx. This is like classical Marxism, orthodox classical Marxism, because they want safety, in their workplaces. They want a 40-hour work week. Workers are so obnoxious. They're just so annoying. They always want stuff, right? They want not to be harassed by their employers. They want not to work when they're 5. Like 5-year-olds, they should just be able to work in a factory. Why can't they just work in the factories, right? Just do their job. All right, that's one of the tensions. The other one is that capitalism produces an overabundance for the top, but also poverty right at the bottom. So we're talking about like raw, unregulated capitalism, which in the United States clearly is not raw, unregulated capitalism. It's more of like a pseudo-socialist republic. Yeah.
That's pretty much what's happening with like Amazon, right?
What's that?
But that's pretty much what's happening with Amazon, right?
With Amazon? What do you mean? In what way?
Like Jeff Bezos is reducing his usage because of the Amazon workers are getting things from them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's incredibly wealthy, and then they're like Amazon warehouse pickers have, they have like minimum wage jobs and horrible working conditions. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you can look at a lot of different businesses. That's one of the things. And then the workers get really mad. So Marx says once the workers get so mad, they'll just like start burning down the factories. Yeah, exactly, right? So once the Amazon warehouses start, once the workers are like, we're lighting this on fire, then, Bezos has done a bad job of managing worker relations. And then one of the roles of government, according to Marx, is to negotiate that conflict. So Marx maybe underestimated the capacity of government to provide some protections, but not expansive enough protections, etc. But yeah, it's a great example. Good example. Burn it down. All right. So then we're thinking about, that's Marxism. So then neoliberalism, right? So neoliberalism refers to a backlash against the social welfare policies of the 1930s and 1940s, which came right in the wake of the Great Depression. And so in the United States and in other countries, there was no other option except to have the government essentially intervene in the market, increase taxes, right, by a lot, provide a bunch of welfare protection, Social Security, then later Medicare and Medicaid in the 60s. In Britain, right, in England, they have the national health system, which is, government-provided health care, except for dental, they don't do that. And regulations too, right? In the 60s and 70s, you get environmental regulations, where the government's imposing certain environmental requirements, all of these things. There's an accretion of them. It's not like one event, right? It's not just like, oh, well, here's the regulatory framework, 1947, right? It's a bunch of different things that happen to increase regulations on capital and on the system. And so in the 1970s, there's oil supply shocks, kind of a mini recession. Ronald Reagan then is elected, right, in the 1980 election. Margaret Thatcher is the Prime Minister of England, first female Prime Minister, and they embark on a program of reform. And that's what most people identify as the roots of neoliberalism. So earlier we mentioned Foucault and these lectures that he's giving in 1978, 1977, 1978, in part talking a little bit about, it's like Margaret Thatcher's reforms and different reforms that are happening to deregulate. So deregulating the market and allowing the market to have free reign. And so neoliberalism is characterized by decreased taxes and deregulation. So that's why it's the new liberalism. So classical liberalism, remember, was defined by freedom of the individual to create their own, right, methods. And then neoliberalism is the new method of freeing individuals and corporations to essentially do whatever they want to. Okay, I don't know that we have enough time to watch Noam Chomsky, but we can send out the link. It's a few minutes. Yeah, we'll skip Noam, but Noam's great. I like Noam Chomsky. Let's do talk about neoliberalism and then legal immigration, though. So I think that this criticism is very potent and powerful against affirmatives that will claim some sort of economic impact. So, right, the DREAM Act, when you're like, whoa, well, the Dreamers would be really great if they could work in our economy. What would the criticism of neoliberalism seem to suggest about that? Yeah, what do you think?
That you're integrating them into a system where they're just gonna work and then die.
Yes, exactly. They're just going to work and then die. So a system of exploitation, right, that underpins this capital accumulation by the few and then exploitation of the many. And so, yeah, why would we incorporate them? Why would we bring those, people into that system? They would be better off not being involved into that system at all. Yeah.
Could you also relate it to how a lot of companies want to make it workers specialized jobs and specialized skills, and how they're only being seen as ways to, get the company richer and
Yes, absolutely. So against the H-1B app, the high-skilled worker app, yeah, you just treat them instrumentally. So it's like you're just a means to an end. We don't actually care about you at all, as an individual. We just want your skills. And then when you show your skills to our company, it makes a bunch of money, we actually don't care about you even a little bit. So yeah, you're being smoothly incorporated into that system. And so there are a bunch of economic impacts of immigration: brain drain, worker exploitation, poverty. These are some of the, there are disadvantages, right, like the brain drain VA, but there are also consequences of the neoliberal framework under which immigration occurs. So, right, if immigration, if it was less of a neoliberal framework, there could be regulations that would limit the impact of brain drain, for example, by, remunerating a country for their lost revenue. Like, oh, cool, well, Sam wants to come over from, England, well, we're going to just pay, into their economy a little bit to, demonstrate the loss of that worker or whatever. And then the market relationship, so yeah, business, H-1Bs, H-2As, DREAM Act, against those types of affirmatives, I think the neoliberalism critique is pretty good, it's pretty solid. So, how would you go about answering neoliberalism?
Cap good.
Was that?
Cap good.
Cap good, all right, cap good.
That getting people into the United States through immigration is net better for that worker as opposed to them staying where they would otherwise be.
Okay, so you could make an argument for, if you were reading like a Syrian refugee affirmative, for example, it was like, look, their country is in chaos, they should just be able to come over to the United States, we have an ethical obligation, right, to provide them with access to our country. Absolutely, yeah, I think that makes sense too. Or like, we shouldn't deport them, so like the ethics version of the DREAM Act, yeah, it's like we shouldn't deport people who are ethically obligated to not deport them, etc. So, yeah, we did.
Assuming Article 9, big economic impact statement.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So if it's an ethics version of the affirmative, then you could preview it fairly simply, probably, right? If the app was like, well, we shouldn't deport dreamers because that would be unethical, and then the negative says, well, we shouldn't exploit people for their labor. We shouldn't, have this system of neoliberalism whereby we create these exploitative relationships. You could say, oh, okay, cool. So we shouldn't deport people and we shouldn't exploit them. That sounds fine. Yeah. What's that? Yeah, question the all. So how does it work? Is it feasible? What do we do? How do we replace capitalism? So as part of like a capitalism good debate, you would usually advance an argument why capitalism is inevitable, why it's like neoliberal frameworks are inevitable to some degree, etc. Yeah, so the alt people, there are a lot of folks who get really mad whenever someone suggests there's an alternative to capitalism. So yeah, what do you think?
You can argue that, like, in the case of the DREAM Act, you're actually providing more welfare, which is against the idea of neoliberalism.
Yeah, so you could be like we're a little bit in the direction of socialism. Yeah, so it's at the very least an incremental, progressive approach to the alternative. I like that. Yeah, so how does the alternative, right, resolve the current, crisis of capitalism? Seems like a permutation would be able to as well. Yeah, I think that's pretty popular with these style of capitalism critique, neoliberalism critique. So, a lot of different possibilities. Neoliberalism's been around for a long time. You probably, how many of you all debated neoliberalism before? Yeah. You all. Check. There are regulations about computer usage here. So, it's not a neoliberal framework. Yeah. What's your thought? Oh, you debated it? Yeah. How many of you have gone for neoliberalism, like a significant amount of time? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. How many of y'all, it's like your main negative argument? Yeah, okay. Yeah, you go for it like, you can go for it in every debate if you want. You can go for it against the, identity teams or against the critical teams. Yeah. You can only go for, you can't go for neoliberalism against the neolib team. That's it. There's one circumstance. If the F stands up and says neoliberalism is bad. That's the only circumstance you can't go for it. Okay. So last on the agenda are any general questions. So any last questions you have for me about the basic critique, about the different criticisms we discussed, co-dominant, etc. Yeah. Hey, be quiet. Let's have y'all. Oh, the alternative, the neoliberalism critique. Yeah. So how many of you said you go for neoliberalism as your main negative argument? What's your alternative?
Either socialism, either revolution called or anti-capitalist pedagogy called.
So anti-capitalist pedagogy or revolution? Yeah, who else goes for neoliberalism as their main negative? Yeah, Bradford, what's your...
It's some arguments about red, green, minor utopias, which is basically a system that allows citizens to, on a micro-political level, choose between communism and socialism.
Okay, so red, green, minor utopias. So allow individuals to choose between socialism, eco-socialism, revolution, anti-capitalist pedagogy. I'd say that anti-capitalist pedagogy is the least preferable of those. Yeah, it's not like a specific concrete alternative, it's more of an orientation away from the way that the affirmative is constructed or constituted. It's kind of like a rejection of the capitalist underpinnings of the app. In general, so maybe one last thought for debating the critique. While it is nice to have a concrete, specific alternative that's easily explainable in prospects, etc., the more your alternative does that, the more easily it is permed, right? The more compatible it is with the affirmative. So in a strategic sense, the alternative to every K should just be reject the affirmative. That should always be the alternative, right? In a strategy sense. And then when when you describe what it means to reject the affirmative, as part of rejecting the affirmative, this you would do in the 2NC, not in the 1NC. Definitely not the one NC. In the two NC, you'd be like, oh, well, as part of rejecting the affirmative, we would offer these, micro-utopias where individuals could choose between, communism and eco-socialism and all these different political formations. But rejecting the affirmative is definitely the first step to doing that. It's a prerequisite to opening up space to imagine new futures and new alternatives. So, yeah. Yeah. An appropriate situation to kick the alt? I guess if you were wanting to go for a framework argument about subjectivity formation, so the way that we form our subjectivity within a debate round in the context of the affirmative advantage selection or construction. So if they were reading a high-skilled workers ad with a big economy advantage, you could probably kick the alt fairly safely and just say that the affirmative has created some sort of either psychological or ethical investment in the structures of neoliberalism, and then just win that that's ethically bankrupt. And you don't really need an alt. You're just like, no, the app's just unethical, and you should evaluate that first. You'll say, like, is the app ethical or are they not? If they're unethical, just vote nay, right? And that's reasonable to me. So, yeah.
In the case for like the three actors, like the workers app, like integration of that, how would you evaluate the costs and like the benefits of running something like Agamben versus something like neoliberalism?
I mean, I guess it would depend on your familiarity with the argument, how equipped you were to go for either of them, probably the judge and their familiarity with the argument. Ideally, you would be ready to go for the most appropriate criticism. So it's not that high of a bar, in my opinion, if you're like, I like the K and I kind of want to be good at the K, to get good at neoliberalism, Agamben, and settler colonialism. I think if you're good at those three, I think that's very feasible. I think for the rest of camp, you work on them and do pretty good by the end of camp. And then you could go for one of those critiques when it was appropriate. Yeah, so I guess in terms of calculating, depending on their advantage selection too, I think it would be different. If they were reading like an ethics version, then you might say, well, I'm going to go for the Agamben argument, because I think it's a little bit better at answering the advantage and have way better links to the advantage, even though neoliberalism might be the general approach you would take against their usual mechanism. That's how I would approach it, right? Is that you generate good links and terms case arguments, and then where the alternative could resolve the impact of the app too. So, because you can always pivot a little bit. If they read like a big economy ad or something, you always read the neoliberalism stuff a lot, right? You're just rejecting the app. It's all reject the app. So, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. Oh, wow. So here's the question. If you're affirmative and the negative reads the settler colonialism critique, and you lose the ontology debate, so you lose that the government is oriented towards the elimination of natives, and that's its purpose, can you win if you're affirmative? Or what would you need to do to win? Who thinks you just could not win? Yeah, okay. Yeah. All right, who thinks you could win? Okay. What could you do? What do you think?
You could read like a framing card that says you should prioritize like problems that are happening now.
Prioritize problems are happening now. Yeah, what do you think? No link and perm. Yeah, if you want that there really wasn't a link at all. But the ontology argument kind of suggests a link though. So part of the problem here is you definitely dispute the ontological construction. I think you can suggest that maybe settler colonialism is a strong structure, but that it's not ontological in a sense, right? It's not like a metaphysical principle of the world. So the federal government could do something that was anti-settler colonial, right? And then you could have a card or an argument that demonstrates that, and then be like, the plan, right, is part of that. It's also anti-settler colonial. It doesn't have to be part of that system. So. Yeah. You have a question over here?
Oh, I was just going to add that. I was going to say you can read offense to the alternative that says alternative actually makes it worse.
You could, yeah, if you had an offense like that. So if you were lucky enough to have cards that made it worse for natives. I mean, there may be no alternative something. It'd be very dangerous though in all criticisms, and I'm sure you'll hear this during the Afro-pessimism discussion as well. You really need to question anytime someone says ontology, right? Figure that out. Because what they're suggesting with an ontology argument is that the world is created and constituted in a particular way, and it's created and constituted in a way that makes the affirmative undesirable, right, or ineffective. So maybe you just vote neg on presumption because you can't re-articulate, right, value within a settler colonialist framework. So there's no chance for the alt, right? It's the only way to solve or do it. So, yeah. Well, I think we're out of time, so thank you very much.